My favorite plant to grow in my yard is the fruit tree, because you plant it once and you get fruit for decades. If you have ever been curious on the best ways to be successful in growing fruit trees, today is your lucky day. Why? Because my team and I have compiled our best interviews and videos in one place to assist you in growing your own toe-tingling peaches and awesome apples right out your front or back door. Plus, as an added bonus, we've included an in-depth guide to successfully growing fruit trees in your yard. To get access to this information, it's free by the way, just go to urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444. That's urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the grow your own food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Jesse Sparks to talk about his experience with harvesting in his own neighborhood. Jesse is a sixth-generation Arizona native. His great-grandfather owned and operated a farm in Tempe, Arizona, and Jesse's mother's side comes from farming heritage in Iowa. So he has been surrounded by gardens, fruit trees, and fresh produce his entire life. He and his wife had a townhome where they started growing food by converting the lawn area in the back into a 5-square-foot garden. Then, after moving and expanding into a larger area with more garden space, he noticed he physically felt better after eating homegrown produce. Jesse travels a lot for work and is constantly on airplanes with recirculating air, but he credits never having come home with the travel crud to his healthier, homegrown eating style. Jesse lives in Northwest Phoenix with his wife Heather, their 2 sons, and is expecting twin daughters due in early 2017. Congratulations, by the way, and welcome to the show today, Jesse.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
Sure. So as you mentioned, both sides of my family come from farming heritage. And so we always grew up with various gardens, and when we'd have family get-togethers at our extended family's homes, there was always a garden or fruit trees. So it was just something that was always around. Mm-hmm. So as we got older, we being myself and my brother and sister and all the kids in my generation, right? We sort of took over the reins and then built gardens or planted fruit trees at our homes.
Oh, nice.
It was not really a conscious decision. It was just more of a natural progression.
Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Go ahead.
So it was, when we were growing up and we'd help cooking in the kitchen, my mom would say, hey, go and grab some cilantro or go and pick a few tomatoes. Or when we'd have those get-togethers, the potlucks, because my mom is number 8 out of 9 children.
Oh, wow.
So
mm-hmm.
our gatherings were quite large.
Uh-huh.
And, it would be a potluck, and a lot of the dishes would be made with the ingredients or the produce from everybody's garden.
Cool.
So when I became old enough to have my own house, it was sort of okay, where are we going to put the garden? Not should we have one, but where will it need to be? And so that's just sort of extended down into my kids now. My oldest son, is almost 6. And
oh, wow.
He is now the gopher when I need a couple of pieces of basil, or, I'll measure out on his thumb how much rosemary I need, and he'll go out and clip the rosemary, et cetera. So, we're kind of passing it down, as it were, to my kids.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like it's just an automatic. It's like of course this happens.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that just has to do with, everybody in the family appreciating good quality produce and mm-hmm. good tasting produce. And why would you not? If you know the food is delicious and it's available, why would you use the dried spices when you can go out and harvest the fresh stuff?
Right. Exactly. So what we're here to talk about today is really something that I've for years called gleaning. And that is you're pretty much just looking around your neighborhood, seeing things growing, and then you're going and harvesting that. Is that not the case?
Yeah, that's absolutely what's happening. We have a really great community here in Phoenix, and there are a lot of YouTube videos and Facebook groups where people will chime in or post pictures of what they have growing or videos of what they're harvesting. I saw a video that Jake Mace had produced talking about edible cactus, and he showed a Peruvian apple cactus.
Ooh.
And it looked similar to a cactus that was on my neighbor's property. So I posted a picture onto a Facebook group page and said, hey, I just want to make sure this is edible before I go about eating something that might not be. And I had a whole bunch of positive comments come back. It turned out that the cactus was a monstrose variety. And so then I knew at that point that it was edible. So I just had to figure out a way to get to the fruit, because this cactus was huge. It's was probably, 16 feet with maybe a dozen arms or so.
Wow.
And it was just completely loaded with these lovely orange fruits. So I was obsessed for a while about this cactus. So I would drive past this house every day on my way home from work, and I always kept an eye out to see if the homeowner might be out working in the lawn or taking groceries or something in, but that never happened. And I kept seeing that more and more of these fruits had bird holes in it. So I decided, hey, I'm just going to ask, because they might not even know that this is an edible cactus.
Right.
So I went to the house, knocked on the door, and said, hey, I'm your neighbor from a few houses down. I was just curious, did you know that the cactus on the side of your house has edible fruit? It's fruiting right now, and everything that's on there is edible. The woman that was in the house said, no, we had no idea. It's actually a nuisance that we have to clean up after. And I said, well, how about this? How about if you would allow me to harvest the fruits, I will clean up all of the droppings around the cactus and then split the harvest with you. So she was absolutely in favor of allowing
free labor
me to harvest this. But it turns out she was actually a seasonal resident, and she and her husband were getting ready to leave for several months. So she said, you can have any and all the fruit that this cactus provides, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Wow.
So my son and I ended up going over, and while I harvested the fruits off the cactus, my son picked up all the scraps off the ground and threw them in a 5-gallon bucket so we can take care of them. And the fruit was delicious, and we harvested until there was no more fruit to harvest. And I sent pictures to her and said, hey, here's what the insides look like, a little iPhone video of me and my son enjoying the fruit. So, it was just, I think that was important to follow up and say, hey, here's how we actually enjoyed the fruit. And true to our word, we kept the understory of that cactus clear, and would continue to do so during the next harvest.
Wow. So a Peruvian apple cactus.
Correct.
I've seen one. I may have even tried one, but tell people what that is, because basically what you're proposing is that we eat cactus fruit, right?
Absolutely. So most people are familiar with a kiwi. You cut it in half, and it's got some fleshy insides with edible seeds. There are several different edible cactus, actually not even several, there are many different varieties of edible cactus, and living in Arizona, there is an abundance of that, not only in the desert, but used as landscaping as this one was.
Right.
So if you take the fruit off, there's no spikes on the fruit. It's not like a prickly pear cactus.
Oh, right.
It's a very soft flesh. You can cut it in half and use a spoon to eat out the insides. Some people have an experience with dragon fruit. It's very similar as far as the way that you eat it. I really like to harvest the fruits, put them in the fridge for about an hour so they're nice and cool. And I just eat it either mixing it into a smoothie or as a snack. It's a very sweet, I shouldn't say very sweet. It's not like candy sweet, but it's a fruit sweet, sort of like a kiwi that's not tangy.
Wow. All right. So you just mentioned several fruits here besides that are these cactus fruits or are they succulent fruits or are they the same thing?
I'm not a botanist or a horticulturist, so I don't know if I can accurately answer that question, but
That's
they
all right.
are growing directly out of the cactus.
Uh-huh.
And so for succulents, I suspect that might be more of the prickly pear. Well, that's a cactus as well. So I don't really know the answer to that question.
Okay, good. No, so nor do I. Maybe our listeners can shoot me an email at greg@urbanfarm.org and answer that question. That's cool. So what size are these fruit? This is fascinating for me. I know I've seen them before, but can you share that with our listeners?
So specifically the Peruvian apple cactus, or the monstrose, which is another common variety. It's just a more twisted kind of aggressive looking cactus, but they're related. I'd say about the size of a baseball, but maybe a little more oblong shape instead of a spherical. Yeah. And it also depends on the age of the cactus and whether or not you get to eat the whole thing because the birds might have pecked a hole in it. But provided that it's less than half of the overall fruit, I will typically cut out the portion that the birds ate, and I will enjoy the rest.
Exactly.
It's probably a little bit smaller than the size of your fist, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So you mentioned dragon fruit. Can you speak a little to those?
Sure. Dragon fruit is another type of cactus that grows. It's a vining cactus. It will grow up a trellis or grow up a tree, or you can train it. And then those will provide some real wild looking fruits. I can definitely understand why they call it a dragon fruit, because you have this green cactus and you have this red or yellow and almost magenta with, it looks like flames are coming off of it with the way that the fruit grows. It's wild.
Right. Wow. And then prickly pears. And the thing we have to be cognizant with prickly pears is there's stickers on them, right?
Right. So after having success with this cactus in this one neighbor, I kind of looked at my yard and said, okay, well, what else do I not have that I know is edible? And right around that same time, all of the prickly pear cactuses were fruit. Right. And so there's these real deep purple prickly pear fruits that were just everywhere. And again, on my drive home, I have a neighbor right across the street that had a loaded prickly pear. I mean, these things were just like blood red. It was super dark. And similar to the last story, I kind of knocked on the door, said, hey, I'm your neighbor from the street over, and I just was curious if you knew that this was edible or if you'd be interested in sharing a harvest. With the prickly pears, I actually ended up making some jelly, and I said, hey, I will trade you some processed jelly for the ability to harvest your fruits. And it was a similar story. Oh, yeah, those things are a nuisance. I have my landscapers come out, and we'll just throw them all away when they're done. And I don't even really look at that side of the house, so go for it. So right now I have a 100% success rate in just asking if I can harvest some of the food. And similar to the last story, I harvested them up, made sure that I cleaned up the area.
Yeah.
When I made the jelly, I came over and said, hey, here's the jelly that I made off of your cactus in your yard. And I really appreciate, the ability to harvest out of your yard.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What was their reaction?
I think she was a little kind of taken back that I actually followed through. But she seemed to enjoy it. I told her when the jar was empty to bring it back, and I'd give her another one and, kind of propagate that whole sharing the processed fruit. But yeah, I think she was really curious to have the apple cactus. That particular neighbor, it was not from the United States. It's only in the valley just for a little bit of time while her husband was working on a contract job. So she had no idea that you can make jelly out of that cactus. So it was really
cool. So really, yes, you're getting food, but really, I think the bigger picture here is how you're building your community. Can you say more about that and your interactions with neighbors and like that?
Sure. So the first neighbor with the monstrose cactus, being a seasonal resident, she had asked if I wouldn't mind picking up the weekly newspaper so that way, nobody would know that the house was vacant. I said, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
I'd be more than happy to handle that.
Uh-huh.
When she and her husband came back into town, my kids and I went over there and we spent a little time visiting. And
Nice.
they were really grateful to meet somebody in the neighborhood because they had just recently purchased the house, recently moved in.
Uh-huh.
And then they're only here for the winter months. So they really appreciated the community aspect as much as I did.
Wow.
And similarly with the prickly pear cactus,
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to meet somebody else that is in the neighborhood because you don't really know who all is living on your street. We don't have these front
Right.
porches in Arizona, or at least not in the tract home areas that I live in. And it was nice to just know people, so you can wave to them. If you see a car, you know who that car belongs to, et cetera. So my sense of community is definitely much greater knowing more people that are around my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I can only assume that the same would be true on the other end.
Yeah, exactly. When we have parties, for the most part, where do people congregate?
In my
kitchen.
family or in the neighborhood? Oh, yeah. Yep.
In the kitchen, right? And it's because I see it because it's around food, and what you're doing is successfully connecting your neighbors with food.
That's true.
How cool is that? Congratulations.
And then I've since offered adjacent neighbors, hey, I've got a whole bunch of cilantro that's about to bolt. Do you need any?
Yeah.
Or I've got an overabundance of whatever it is. Do you need some? Because I kind of have an emotional connection to food waste. So
right.
I try and distribute it where possible. So, if anybody around needs anything for salsa, jalapenos, et cetera, they know they can come to me and I'll have an abundance and I can take it right off the plant.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me more about, you said you have an emotional connection to food waste. Tell me more about that.
Well, food, when you grow it, in my opinion, is no longer a commodity. It's no longer something that you can just run and pick up more of. I fed it, I watered it, nurtured it, kept the birds away from it, pulled off caterpillars, put up a fence when rabbits got in and were eating it. So, I'm invested in these crops. So I don't want them to go to waste. And not only that, the food quality and the taste is so much better than what you can get in the store.
Yeah.
That I really want to make sure that I don't miss out on that. A salad, just the name salad sounds kind of bland, but if it's all your own produce, there are so many wild flavors you can get in the salad. I've got some marigold flowers growing, and you put that in there, and it's a different flavor notes. And if you are making cucumber salad and you get dill right out of your garden, you add dill, and it's much different.
Wow, cool. I know here at the Urban Farm, there's always so many things to harvest, like nasturtiums and nasturtium leaves, nasturtium flowers, and there's this little weed that grows in my yard called oxalis or sour grass. It's like a 3-leaf clover thing, and it's really lemony tasting. So I've found that if we just open our eyes up out in the yard, there are so many things to harvest and nourish us with.
I completely agree. I recently found out that there is a weed called elephant food.
Oh, yes.
It's related to purslane. And my brother-in-law has some growing in a pot in his backyard. And it was just there to look good, but now I know it's edible, so it's there might be a few sections missing if he goes out and looks right now.
There you go. There you go. So is cactus the only thing you forage for?
It's the only thing that I've reached out and asked my neighbors for, but there are definitely some other items on the to forage list when it comes back around. Again, a lot of people or in my neighborhood have mesquite trees, and they only have them just to look good or provide shade. But I really want to harvest the dried pods and make mesquite flour to perhaps make some bread.
Right.
So I fully intend on asking another neighbor if I can trade my cleanup services to perhaps take those beans home, and then I'll make some bread and then provide the bread. There are Palo Verde trees that have edible bean pods, kind of like edamame. And in my backyard, I don't have either of those trees. So I fully intend to find a source that I can not only harvest, but then share the harvest back with who I'm getting it from. And I think that's the key. You really have to
complete the circle, maybe?
Complete the circle, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. So how many yards are you harvesting things from right now?
Well, nothing is in season now, so I'd say 0. But
let's call it this year.
This year, 3.
Wow, cool. All right.
And I only started this whole harvest. Actually, I take it back, 4. There was another prickly pear cactus, again, on my neighbor across the street, and I wanted to eat the pads. And so I asked, hey, can I harvest some of these pads? I'm going to try and grill them up. Did you know that they're edible, et cetera? And again, I'm 3 for 3 on talking to a lady resident of the home. But, again, that she was just like, hey, I have no idea why anybody would want to eat these. They've got spines. I said, well, you have a spineless variety, but you're right. There are little tiny spines on there. I will clean up and I will grill it, and then I can bring you one. She didn't have any interest in that, but she said that particular cactus grows over into her walkway. And so she was going to pick up a machete and to chop it down so that way it doesn't interfere with her walkway again.
Right.
I said, okay, I will harvest just from this side, and I'll harvest it back to the point where it's no longer in your walkway.
Nice.
So I ate several prickly pear pads, not the fruit, but the pads. Off of that particular cactus, again, providing a service because it was interfering with her walkway. She didn't have to go out and try and machete this cactus on her own, and it was a win-win.
Right.
So she didn't want any of the harvest, but she appreciated the assistance in the landscaping.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd say 4 homes currently this year.
How cool is that?
All within walking distance.
All within, oh yes, of course, all within walking distance, and all with neighbors now that you have a better connection with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So what was the first conversation like that, and what prompted you to start this?
So the first conversation was definitely a little nerve-wracking for me because you have to approach somebody that you don't know and you have to ask them for something.
Yeah.
But I knew that not only was I asking for something, I was going to provide something in return. So I had a pretty good feeling I'd be able to hedge that a little bit. So, I was kind of nervous and knocked on the door, stood back a little bit, and just said it. I started with, hey, my name is Jesse, your neighbor from a few houses down, or a neighbor from the street over, or et cetera. So they have that connection. I'm your neighbor, and that word neighbor, I think, resonates.
Yeah, big time.
You build a little bit of that common ground. And I just said, hey, this is what you have. Did you know it was edible? And if you didn't, can I assist in your understanding of how to eat this plant?
Yeah.
I was definitely nervous. But after that first one, the rest of them were easy. Because what's the worst they can say? They can say no.
Exactly.
But there are so many of these cactuses and trees that are in the neighborhood, somebody is eventually going to say yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So far, everybody has. But you don't lose anything if they say no.
If they say no, yeah, exactly. Wow. I love that you're doing this. So you had mentioned your son being involved in the harvesting and preparation. What's he do? How does he help?
So I started off kind of easy. He held the bucket, the 5-gallon bucket, while I picked up some of the refuse around the cactus, and I convinced him that there are no spines in this particular fruit, that he could pick them up.
Right.
And then once he saw me do it a handful of times, he would clean up the ground layer while I was on the ladder getting the fruit from the top parts of the cactus. So he helps out with that quite a bit. When it comes time to doing the mesquite bean harvest, I'm going to need a lot of beans. There's going to be a lot of cleanup, so he's definitely going to be deputized to help with that as well.
Love that. So what are you currently growing at home?
Let's see. I've got some eggplant, some jalapenos. My okra is still going crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I planted some leafy greens, but we had a heat wave and they all bolted. So I'm letting them go to seed because when people come to my house, they're like, what the heck is growing over there? Because it looks like a lettuce, but it has this giant stalk out and flowers everywhere.
Yeah.
I said, that's romaine. That doesn't look like romaine. Well, this is what it looks like if you let it complete its life cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We had a interesting, you should say it, a heat wave. I wouldn't have called it a heat wave before 30 seconds ago, but you're right. We had a heat wave in November and late October and November, and things are going to seed already, which is odd for us here.
Yeah, it was crazy. My brassica is still doing well. I think everybody kind of starts with an herb garden, so that's what I started with. Yeah. Your basil, cilantro. The rosemary is a bush, and that's something that's perennial that you can plant once and then continue to harvest off of. So that's where I started, and then I said, okay, I'm going to make a salsa garden, kind of expand it out to a salsa garden. And then in this community, this Facebook community and some of these YouTube presences, I would see something different, like somebody who's growing Okinawan spinach. Well, what's that? It looks cool. Well, that'll grow in my zone. Let me get that. And, somebody says, hey, you plant a perennial tree colored once and you can continue to harvest off of it. So I was like, okay, well, that's intriguing. Let me go try and find something that I can perennially harvest off of. So that's kind of been expanding now to where instead of people being able to look at my garden and knowing what everything is, they now have to ask because there are
some interesting things growing.
Yeah. So instead of the curly kale, I've got dinosaur kale and other kind of varieties. I've got Swiss chard that's bigger than a dinner plate. It's insane.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
So it's definitely a point of pride for me, but it's also really interesting for visitors to come over and see it. And they're like, oh, what's that tree? Well, that's a moringa. You can eat it. And my youngest son is almost 2, and he goes out and he eats a moringa right off the tree.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. One of the things that we've done with the Swiss chard leaves that are so big is rather than using a tortilla to do a wrap, we'll use that to do a wrap. Have you ever tried that?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll put hummus and some pickled carrots and some sliced up peppers and roll that up and eat it kind of like a burrito.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
So the first time that I failed, I harvested all of the prickly pear fruits, and I was in the process of making jelly, and I was really excited about it. It was the first time I'd ever made jelly. First time I'd ever canned, not in the presence of my mom or my grandma. So I was really excited I was going to get this done. So when you mix the pectin, which is the agent, the thickening agent, when you mix the pectin in with the juice and the sugar, it has a tendency to separate pretty quickly. I mixed it in and I filled up all of my glass jars and I sealed them. And when I went to use some of the jelly, it was real soupy on top. And I thought I messed up the ratio. I followed the recipe. I was like, this makes no sense. But I ended up kind of using it. I get about halfway through the jar and there is just a hockey puck of pectin at the bottom of this thing. And it is solid and you couldn't use it for anything. So I basically blew the whole first batch because I didn't continuously stir as I was filling the jars.
Right.
So that was a bummer because you go through all of this process of getting the thorns off the prickly pear cactus and making this jelly and sterilizing everything and just to kind of have blah. But fortunately I had plenty of fruit still on the cactus. Right. I had frozen some that I didn't have enough pectin to make the jelly for. Tried it again, and ended up coming out wonderfully, and I distributed it to anybody who wanted to try some.
Wow. And one of the cool things about prickly pear syrup is the color.
Oh yeah, it's a real deep purple, and if you hold it up to the light, then it kind of has this interesting color shift. It's awesome. Yeah,
and it's really sweet. My mom actually used to harvest prickly pears when we were driving back. We used to have a cabin in Payson in the 1970s. And when we would drive back in August, we'd stop, by the side of the road in the desert and pick prickly pears and bring them home and convert them into jellies and jams. And, they also do great in lemonade and margaritas and like that as well.
Cactus cooler margarita, a little bit of coconut water, a little bit of prickly pear juice, and some other accoutrements, if you will, and you've got a lovely drink.
Nice. What do you consider your biggest success?
Biggest success, being able to eat an entire meal out of my garden.
Oh my gosh.
Which is something I never really had the space to do before.
Yeah.
I really like that my son knows what some of the plants are, and when I pick off some of the caterpillars, I can put it in his hand, and he loves it wiggling all over his hand. And I tell you, if you've got a young kid and you want to keep them occupied for a solid 30 minutes, just put a caterpillar in their hand.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Just over the moon.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big success. A lot of people will have gardens for convenience. A lot of people will have gardens because they want the food to taste good. A lot of people will have them for a health reason. Mm-hmm. And I have a little bit of all of those. And I really feel like I'm doing the best that I can for myself by trying to eat right out of the ground. There's minimal processing. My green beans, when I harvest them and I eat them, they taste better. And sometimes I wonder, some produce, if I get distracted and I don't get to eat it right then, and I come back the next day, it goes from this nice crisp bean to like a pool noodle. And I wonder, what do they have to do to these beans in the supermarket to make them last so long on the shelf? Like, I don't know the answer, but there has to be something, because my beans right from the garden are like spaghetti noodles. They're just super bendy. They don't have that nice crisp. So there has to be something. And to know that I'm not eating whatever that something is, it means a lot to me.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to throw a little twist in here in the podcast. I don't usually tell guests what their biggest success is, but I just want to let everybody know, you and I met about, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago here at the Urban Farm. You came on one of our tours, right?
Yes, sir.
And we chatted for, 5 minutes, and then we chatted for 5 minutes before we started here, and we've had this podcast interview. And what I really admire about you, and what I'd call one of your biggest successes, is your ability to make connections in the community. I just really want to honor you for that. That is something that is really, really important. And we as a culture, especially these days, we as a culture need to start building bridges and building friendships in the community. And so thank you for doing that. Good job.
Well, I appreciate that. It's very kind to say. I would like to take credit for that, but their community was already there. I just jumped into it. Yeah. I mean, the community in my neighborhood, for sure. I can take a little bit of credit for expanding that, but really it had to do with the Facebook community and the projects like the Urban Farm. And, Jake Mace has tours in his garden, and some other people that have tours in their gardens. And the community is there. And I didn't realize how deep and how helpful it was until I became a part of it. So this is just my little tiny extension off of something that was already really going well.
Yeah, exactly. Good job. So what drives you?
Well, with 4 kids, you have to pick a hobby that doesn't take a whole lot of time if it doesn't need to, or that you can do a couple of minutes here and there.
Right.
So what drives me is just having a hobby that doesn't collect dust on the shelf like a musical instrument may.
Oh yeah.
But in addition to that, I would be lying if I didn't say there was a family component to it. Everybody in the family, my aunts and uncles, they've either had farms or gardens, as I had mentioned before, and this is my part. So I'm growing things like pineapple guavas that nobody else is growing. Mm-hmm. So when we get together, I get to bring a harvest and say, hey, here's something that I'm growing that you guys might not have. My aunt has got persimmons or other things that are growing in there, apricots. And so since she has those trees, I don't need to grow them because there's enough harvest that everybody can share with each other. So when we have these family get-togethers, everyone kind of meanders around the yard like, oh, what's in season? You've got this tree that's full of figs. Let me help you with some of those.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I like that I have my little part of that story.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm all about education, and I have to know, is there a book that's been influential for you in this process in your life?
There is. There is a book that kind of governs a lot of pieces of my life, and it's Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh my gosh, yes, of course. Uh-huh.
And there are a couple of points in there. One is that sometimes you're a product of your environment, kind of right place, right time. But then there are other parts where you can invest the time to become a master of the craft. And he has this thing, the 10,000 hour rule, that it takes 10,000 hours to become a master of what you're at. And, every once in a while I'll step back and take a look at my professional life or take a look at my personal life or a hobby or an interest and kind of see where I am on that track. So I have a realistic expectation of where I should be or where I believe I should be on that path. So that book has been huge in a large portion of my adult life.
Wow, cool. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
To get started today. That's a common theme, even in your podcast that's been said before, to plant something today. And it's true. You don't know what's going to grow or what's not going to grow, or how, if you've never tasted fresh produce, as in just off of the vine in good soil, right into your mouth, you are missing out. And once that happens, once you realize that instead of, a few tablespoons of a spice, you only need a pinch because of just how dense the flavors are, you get hooked.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to plant something today, even in a pot or a container, you don't have to have a garden in the ground or raised beds or anything of that nature to start. Just start and you'll get the bug.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell people all the time, the most expensive thing to buy and the easiest thing to grow are herbs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Or when you realize that there are more than just two kinds of tomatoes.
Right, exactly.
You grow all these crazy looking heirloom tomatoes that are delicious or that, have these different flavor notes. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could not become addicted to gardening if you try it in earnest.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Jesse. It's been a treat getting to chat with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
If you go to averagejesse.com, it will send you to my YouTube page where I've got some videos on how to harvest the prickly pear fruits and pads, how to get the spines off in a really easy method. That is just basically a newer version of the way that the Native Americans did it. And then also how to make the jelly without having a hockey puck of pectin at the bottom of the jar.
Perfect. So you can find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/averagejesse. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. My favorite plant to grow in my yard is the fruit tree, because you plant it once and you get fruit for decades. If you have ever been curious on the best ways to be successful in growing fruit trees, today is your lucky day. Why? Because my team and I have compiled our best interviews and videos in one place to assist you in growing your own toe-tingling peaches and awesome apples right out your front or back door. Plus, as an added bonus, we've included an in-depth guide to successfully growing fruit trees in your yard. To get access to this information, it's free, by the way. Just go to urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444. That's urbanorchard.org or text FRUIT to 33444.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.